My name is Leo, and I am 35 years old. Just 3 months ago, I stood in a sterile, dimly lit funeral home and listened to my mother deliver a eulogy that wasn't for my father, but for my sister. It was a performance that finally shattered the carefully constructed facade of our family, revealing the rotten core I had long suspected but never dared to confront. My father, Richard, was gone, and in the wake of his sudden death, a twisted narrative was being woven. A narrative that painted my sister, Chloe, as a saint, and me as the prodigal son who had failed them all. My mother's voice, thick with a manufactured grief that felt more like a theatrical monologue, echoed through the quiet room filled with distant relatives and my father's old friends. She spoke of Chloe's unwavering devotion, her incredible sacrifices, and how she, the golden child, had single-handedly kept our family afloat through storms none of us even knew were raging. I watched Chloe, who stood beside my mother, dabbing at her dry eyes with a pristine handkerchief, the very picture of sorrowful grace. But I saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes, the subtle smirk she couldn't quite suppress. It was in that moment, as the lies hung heavy in the air like the cloying scent of lilies, that I knew my father's death was not the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a war. A war for the truth, for the memory of the man he actually was, not the caricature they were creating. And I was determined to be the one to burn their false narrative to the ground, no matter what it took or what dark secrets I had to unearth to do it. The story they were selling was one of heroic sacrifice, but I was about to find out just how deep the deception ran and expose the sordid truth behind the night job that funded their lies. Before that day, before the funeral that felt more like a coronation for my sister, my life was, by all accounts, successful. I had left my sleepy hometown a decade ago, propelled by a quiet desperation to escape the suffocating dynamics of my family. I'd worked my way through college and then clawed my way up the corporate ladder in a city hundreds of miles away. I'm a senior project manager for a large construction firm now, a job that demands precision, foresight, and an intolerance for bullshit. I built a life for myself from scratch, one founded on accountability and hard work, principles that seemed foreign in the house I grew up in. My relationship with my family was maintained. It was a series of polite, scheduled phone calls and obligatory visits on major holidays. I loved my father, I truly did, but our connection was frayed by distance and the unspoken truth that always sat between us. Chloe. My father was a quiet man, a decent man in many ways, but his blind spot was his daughter. From the moment she was born, Chloe was the sun around which our family orbited. She was the artist, the free spirit, the one with boundless potential that was never quite realized, yet always celebrated. Her failures were reframed as learning experiences, her tantrums as passionate expressions of her creative soul. While I was held to rigid standards, expected to be responsible and self-sufficient, Chloe was coddled and enabled. Her charm was her currency, and she spent it lavishly, leaving a trail of unpaid bills and broken promises that my parents would quietly clean up. My father called her his golden child, and the name stuck. It was a constant, grating reminder of my place in the hierarchy. I was the dependable, boring foundation, and she was the glittering, unstable spire they all admired. I never truly hated her for it. I just learned to detach, to build my own world where my worth wasn't measured against her perceived brilliance. I thought I had made my peace with it, that I had successfully amputated that part of my life. I was wrong. The funeral wasn't just a farewell to my father, it was a summons back to the very toxicity I had fled, and it forced me to see that the foundation I had built my life on was about to be tested by the lies that supported my sister's gilded cage. The eulogy was just the beginning. In the days that followed the funeral, our family home became a shrine to Chloe's supposed sainthood. My mother, her face a mask of perpetual weary sorrow, would speak in hushed, reverent tones about Chloe's strength. I don't know what we would have done without her, Leo. She'd say, her eyes darting towards me with a hint of accusation. She gave up so much for your father. So much. Distant aunts and uncles, people I hadn't seen in years, would pull me aside, their faces etched with a pity that was meant for me, not for the bereaved son. They'd pat my arm and say things like, "It's a shame you were so far away, your sister, she has been a true angel." Each comment was a small, sharp jab, reinforcing the narrative that I was the absentee, the selfish son who had chased success while my virtuous sister held the family together. Chloe, for her part, played the role of the reluctant martyr beautifully. She would sigh dramatically, running a hand through her perfectly styled hair, and say things like, "I did what anyone would have done for family. I don't want any credit." But her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, would always find mine, and in them I saw a challenge. She was daring me to question her, to disrupt the performance. The house itself felt different, heavy with secrets. My father's study, once his sanctuary, was now off limits. When I tried to go in wanting to feel some connection to him, my mother physically blocked the door. Chloe has been organizing his papers, she said, her voice tight. It's a very sensitive process. We should let her handle it. Every conversation was a dead end. Every question I asked about my father's final months was met with vague deflections or another hymn in praise of Chloe. It was a coordinated, deliberate effort to ice me out, to make me feel like a stranger in my own home. They were closing ranks, and the more they pushed me away, the more I felt a cold knot of suspicion tightening in my gut. What were they hiding? What storms, as my mother had so dramatically put it, had Chloe supposedly navigated? And why was my father's memory being so thoroughly co-opted to build a pedestal for his golden child? My breaking point came a week after the funeral. I was in the kitchen, making a cup of coffee, when my mother approached me, a stack of envelopes in her hand. Her expression was a carefully calibrated mix of grief and stern resolve. "Leo," she began, her voice low and serious, "we need to talk about the finances." I steeled myself, expecting a conversation about funeral costs or the settling of the estate. What I got was a bombshell. "Your father, he wasn't well, Leo. Not just his heart, he was in trouble. Deep trouble." She laid the envelopes on the table, and I saw the red angry stamps of pay due and final notice on them. They were from credit card companies, private lenders, a second mortgage company I never knew existed. The numbers were staggering. My father, the man I knew as careful and conservative, had been drowning in debt. It was a secret he had carried to his grave, a secret that apparently everyone but me was privy to. He made some bad investments a few years ago, my mother explained, her gaze fixed on the floral pattern of the tablecloth. He was too proud to tell you. He didn't want to worry you. The implication was clear. He didn't want to worry me, the successful son, but it was perfectly fine to burden Chloe. Your sister, my mother continued, her voice swelling with emotion, she found out, and she stepped up. She has been paying these off piece by piece for almost 3 years. She has been working day and night to keep a roof over our heads, to protect your father's dignity. She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a righteous fury. She has sacrificed her youth, her dreams, all while you were out living your life completely oblivious. It was a masterfully delivered guilt trip, designed to make me feel small, selfish, and irrevocably indebted to my sister. But as I looked at the pile of bills and then at my mother's face, I didn't feel guilt. I felt a cold, sharp-edged anger. The story didn't add up. It was too neat, too dramatic, and the star of the show, my sainted sister, was nowhere to be found. The narrative they presented was suffocating. At every turn, I was confronted with the tale of Saint Chloe of the secret debts. My mother would orchestrate conversations with relatives, putting me on speakerphone so they could hear Aunt Carol drone on about how Chloe deserved a medal. That girl, she'd squawk. She could have traveled the world, she could have been a famous artist, but she gave it all up for her family. Not everyone is so selfless. The subtext was always there, hanging in the air. Not like you, Leo. I was expected to fall in line, to bow down and kiss the ring of the newly canonized golden child. They wanted me to express my profound gratitude and, more importantly, to open my wallet. My mother made it clear what was expected. Now that you know the truth, Leo, she said one evening, her tone leaving no room for argument, it's your turn to step up. Chloe has carried this burden alone for too long. You're the one with the big city job. It's time for you to pay her back and take over these debts. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. I was being billed for my absence, for my success. My entire life's work was being reframed as a debt I now owed to my sister for her supposed sacrifices. But my suspicion was a stubborn, growing thing. It gnawed at me, refusing to let me accept their story at face value. I looked at Chloe, really looked at her, and the pieces just didn't fit. She dressed in designer clothes. Her handbag collection alone was worth more than my first car. Her social media was a curated gallery of expensive dinners, weekend getaways to boutique hotels, and spa days. Where was the evidence of this supposed life of hardship and sacrifice? She claimed to be a freelance graphic designer, a notoriously feast or famine profession. How could she afford such a lavish lifestyle while also single-handedly paying down what looked to be 6 figures of debt? It was impossible. When I gently tried to question it, the defenses went up immediately. She deserves to have a few nice things, Leo, my mother would snap. It's the least she can do to feel normal after everything she's been through. Chloe herself would just offer a weary, dismissive smile. I'm very good at budgeting, she'd say. The lie so blatant it was almost impressive. They were gaslighting me, trying to make me believe that my logical questions were a form of attack, a cruel denial of her martyrdom, but I knew numbers. My job revolved around budgets, projections, and financial realities, and the numbers they were presenting simply did not compute. Their story was a house of cards, and I was starting to feel a desperate urge to blow it down. My attempts to get a straight answer were met with a wall of practiced indignation. I decided to approach Chloe directly, cornering her in the living room one afternoon while my mother was out. I tried to keep my tone even, non-accusatory. Chloe, I started. I just want to understand. The amount of debt is huge. I want to help, but I need to see the whole picture. Can you walk me through your income, how you've been managing it all? She stiffened immediately, her soft, sorrowful mask hardening into one of cold fury. Excuse me? She said, her voice dripping with contempt. You want to audit me? After everything I've done? You swan in here after Dad is gone and you have the nerve to question me? Her voice rose with each word, the classic Chloe tactic. Escalate to create a scene, making the other person the aggressor. I have bled myself dry for this family. I have worked myself to the bone at my design business, taking on any project I could get, working until 3 in the morning. And this is the thanks I get? You who abandoned us, coming back to accuse me of... what? Lying? My mother, of course, chose that exact moment to return, walking in on the tail end of Chloe's tirade. She immediately rushed to her daughter's side, wrapping a protective arm around her. Leo, how could you? She hissed, her eyes blazing. Look what you've done! You've upset your sister. She is grieving, she is exhausted, and you attack her like this? You should be ashamed of yourself. The two of them stood there, a united front of righteous victimhood. It was a perfectly executed maneuver, turning my reasonable request for financial transparency into a cruel and baseless attack. I was cast as the heartless villain, the ungrateful son who couldn't even appreciate the monumental sacrifices made on his behalf. I retreated, recognizing that a direct approach was futile. They were too entrenched in their narrative, too skilled at manipulating reality. I knew then that I couldn't fight this from the inside. Their world was a closed loop of self-serving lies, and I was the designated outsider. If I wanted the truth, I would have to find it on my own. And to do that, I would need to bring in someone who was professionally trained to see through the bullshit. That night, I sat in the guest room of my childhood home, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The air was thick with their lies, and I felt like I was suffocating. I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my bag, wrote a short, non-committal note for my mother saying I had to get back to the city for work, and left before dawn. The drive back was a blur of highway lights and churning thoughts. The anger I felt was a clean, cold thing. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a family squabble. It was the focused, steely resolve of a man who had been pushed too far. They had insulted my intelligence, demeaned my father's memory, and tried to manipulate me into financing their fantasy world. They had underestimated me. They saw me as the distant, emotionally detached son, but they had forgotten what I did for a living. I manage multi-million-dollar projects with dozens of moving parts, sniffing out logistical problems and financial discrepancies before they can derail everything. My entire career was built on finding the truth hidden in the numbers. Back in my apartment, surrounded by the life I had built for myself, the life they resented, I felt my purpose solidify. This was no longer just about family drama. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the truth of my father's life from the fiction they had spun around it. I spent the next day online not looking for grief counselors, but for private investigators. I needed someone discreet, professional, and relentless. Someone who wouldn't be swayed by crocodile tears or theatrical displays of victimhood. I found him on the third page of my search results, a small independent agency run by a man named Marcus Thorne. His bio was brief and to the point. 20 years with the city police force, the last 10 as a detective in the financial crimes unit, followed by 5 years in private practice. He specialized in asset verification and lifestyle audits. It was perfect. I called his number, my heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and grim determination. A gravelly voice answered on the second ring. Thorne. I took a deep breath. My name is Leo, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I need your help. I think my sister is lying about her finances, and I need to find out where her money is really coming from. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And then Marcus Thorne said the words that felt like the beginning of the end for my family's web of deceit. Tell me everything. My first meeting with Marcus Thorne was in a nondescript coffee shop miles from my apartment. He was a man who seemed to blend into the background, his features unremarkable, his clothes a uniform of gray and navy. But his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. They were the eyes of a man who had listened to 1,000 lies and had learned to spot the cracks in every single one. I laid out the whole story for him, the golden child narrative, the sudden revelation of my father's massive debts, my mother's accusations, and my sister's inexplicable wealth. I showed him the photos from her social media, the parade of expensive meals and designer accessories. I told him about her supposed freelance career and my own professional assessment that the numbers didn't add up. I felt a sense of release as I told him everything, pouring out the frustration and suspicion that had been festering for weeks. I expected him to be skeptical, to to treat it as just another messy family dispute. But he listened patiently, taking occasional notes in a small, worn notebook, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he took a slow sip of his black coffee. So, the official story is that your sister, Chloe, a freelance graphic designer, is living like a queen, while also paying off a six-figure debt your father left behind. He summarized, his voice a low rumble. And your mother is backing this story, using it to paint you as the villain and pressure you for money. Exactly, I said, relieved that he saw the situation so clearly. They want me to believe she's a martyr. I think she's a con artist. I just can't prove it. Marcus looked at me, a flicker of something, maybe respect in his eyes. You're right to be suspicious. In my experience, when a story sounds too good or too tragic to be true, it usually is. People who are genuinely sacrificing and struggling don't post pictures of $50 cocktails on Instagram. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. This night job you mentioned in the title of this whole saga. Do you have any theories? I shook my head. That's the thing, I have no idea. It has to be something that generates a lot of cash, and something she'd want to keep secret from our conservative family. But beyond that, I'm at a loss. Marcus closed his notebook. Okay, Leo, I'll take the case. My methods are discreet. I'll start with a full background check, a deep dive into her digital footprint, and then if necessary, I'll begin surveillance. I will find out where the money is coming from. He named his price. It was steep, but I didn't hesitate. It was a small price to pay for the truth. As I transferred the retainer to his account, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The fight was no longer mine alone. I had an ally, a professional, who would cut through the emotion and the drama and deliver the cold, hard facts. The game had changed. The first few days of Marcus's investigation were an exercise in patience. He had warned me that the initial phase would be quiet, focused on digital forensics and database searches. He was building a foundation, a profile of Chloe's life based on the data she unknowingly left behind. He ran a comprehensive background check, which confirmed what I already knew. No criminal record, a string of apartments before she moved back home, a degree in fine arts. Nothing out of the ordinary. The first crack in her story appeared when he dug into her business. She had a registered LLC for her graphic design work, but it was barely active. He found a handful of small, low-paying projects from years ago, but nothing recent, and certainly nothing that could sustain a lifestyle of luxury, let alone pay off massive debts. Her business was a shell, a piece of fiction she used as a cover. Her digital footprint is meticulously curated, Marcus told me over the phone. Her public-facing social media is all lattes and landscapes, but she's sloppy in other ways. She uses the same passwords for multiple accounts, has old profiles she's forgotten about. Amateurs always make amateur mistakes. He had found an old, mostly defunct blog she had run in college. It was full of angsty poetry and vague posts about wanting a life of glamour and excitement, about feeling trapped by her small-town roots. One post stood out to him. It was from nearly 8 years ago. In it, Chloe wrote, "Some people work a 9 to 5. But the real money, the real life, happens after the sun goes down. You just have to be willing to do what others won't." It was a small thing, a piece of youthful melodrama, perhaps. But in the context of our current situation, it felt like a prophecy. It was the first hint of the double life I suspected she was leading. It wasn't evidence, not yet, but it was a breadcrumb, a small piece of her true self that she had failed to erase. And it confirmed to Marcus and to me that we were on the right track. The image of the selfless martyr was beginning to crumble, and all it took was a little bit of digging. The next step, Marcus told me, was surveillance. It was time to see what Chloe's life looked like when she wasn't performing for her family or her carefully selected Instagram followers. The surveillance began the following week. Marcus was a ghost. He assured me Chloe would never know she was being watched. He was patient, methodical, and his updates were delivered in the same calm, factual tone, regardless of what they contained. For the first few days, Chloe's routine was disappointingly normal. She would leave the house mid-morning, go to a coffee shop with her laptop, meet friends for lunch, and go to the gym. It was the picture of a leisurely, privileged life, but it wasn't incriminating. It just proved she wasn't working very hard at her supposed design business. The break came on a Thursday night. "We have activity," Marcus's text read simply. He followed up with a call. "She left the house at 9 p.m., dressed to the nines. Told your mother she was meeting a potential client for a late dinner. She wasn't carrying a portfolio or a laptop. My stomach clenched. Where did she go? A high-end hotel downtown, the kind with a $1,000 a night price tag. She didn't go to the restaurant. She went straight up to the penthouse floor." Marcus had a contact on the hotel staff, a perk of his years on the force. He couldn't get a name from the front desk, but he confirmed the penthouse was booked by a corporate entity for a visiting executive. Chloe was there for precisely 2 hours. She left just after 11 p.m., got into a waiting town car, no, a taxi or a rideshare, but a private car service, and was dropped off 2 blocks from her home, walking the rest of the way. She came in the back door. The next morning, Marcus sent me a photo. It was a long-distance shot, slightly grainy, but unmistakably her, getting into the town car. She was smiling, a self-satisfied, triumphant smile that I knew all too well. "I checked the car service," Marcus said on the phone. "Paid for in cash by the passenger. But I got the driver to talk. He makes this run for her 2 or 3 times a week. Different high-end hotels, different luxury apartment buildings in the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. Always late at night. Always a 2-hour stop." The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture that was uglier than I had imagined. This wasn't a night job in the traditional sense. She wasn't bartending or waiting tables. This was something else entirely. This was a service she was providing to wealthy men in private hotel rooms. The night job that was paying off my father's debts and funding her lifestyle was selling her time, her company, and almost certainly more to the highest bidder. The confirmation of what Chloe was doing settled in my gut like a block of ice. It wasn't just one night, one client. Marcus's surveillance over the next 2 weeks painted a clear and damning picture. This was her real job. 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, she would transform from the grieving sacrificial daughter into a high-end escort. Her freelance work was the perfect cover, explaining her flexible schedule and providing a plausible, if flimsy, explanation for her income to our unsuspecting mother. Marcus was meticulous in his evidence gathering. He compiled a detailed log of her movements, dates, times, addresses of luxury hotels and exclusive residential buildings. He had photographs of her entering and exiting these locations, always impeccably dressed, always alone. The most damning piece of evidence came from a bit of digital sleuthing. Marcus managed to gain access to a secondary cloud account Chloe had foolishly linked to her main email. It was a digital treasure trove she thought was hidden. In it, he found a ledger. It was a simple spreadsheet, password protected, but the password was laughably easy for someone like Marcus to crack. Golden Shildone. The spreadsheet detailed dates, client initials, gifts received, which were clearly cash payments and notes. Notes like DH prefers conversation about art history, or MR is generous but emotionally needy. It was a business ledger for her work as a high-priced companion, and it tracked every single dollar she made. The numbers were astronomical, far exceeding what was needed to simply service my father's debts. There were 2 sets of columns in her ledger. One was labeled family debt, and under it, she meticulously tracked the payments she made on the loans and credit cards. But there was a second, much larger column labeled personal. This column tracked her income and expenses for her designer clothes, her spa treatments, her car, her vacations. I saw a line item for a $5,000 handbag listed as a business expense. I saw a $10,000 personal bonus she had given herself after landing a particularly wealthy client. She wasn't just a martyr paying off debts. She was a savvy, cynical businesswoman running a highly profitable secret enterprise. And the most sickening part, she was using the family debt portion as a shield, a tool for emotional blackmail, a way to cement her status as the golden child, while she secretly built her own small empire. The sacrifice was a lie. It was a calculated business decision. She was profiting from our family's crisis, and my father's memory was her primary marketing tool. The rage I felt was so profound, so all-encompassing, it was almost clarifying. All the confusing pieces of the puzzle, all the subtle manipulations and blatant lies now made perfect, sickening sense. Chloe hadn't sacrificed a thing. She had seen an opportunity in our father's financial ruin and had seized it with both hands. The debts weren't a burden to her. They were her cover story, her ticket to a life of consequence-free luxury. She got to live the glamorous life she'd always dreamed of, while simultaneously earning the adoration and eternal gratitude of our family. She had crafted the ultimate grift, turning a family tragedy into her personal golden goose. And my mother was her willing accomplice, the chief promoter of the St. Chloe myth, because it absolved her of her own complicity in my father's downfall. She had stood by while he gambled away their security, and now she was letting Chloe's sordid secret pay the bills, because the truth was too humiliating to face. I looked at the spreadsheet Marcus had sent me. The cold, hard numbers laying out her entire deception. I saw the dates of payments to the loan companies, and right next to them, the dates of her lavish personal purchases. The week she made a $10,000 payment on the second mortgage, she also spent $8,000 on a weekend trip to Miami with friends. The month she told my mother she could barely afford groceries because of the credit card bills, her ledger showed she spent $3,000 on a new wardrobe. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She wasn't just paying bills. She was laundering her illicit income through the narrative of family sacrifice. I thought about my father. A proud man who would have been utterly destroyed to know the depths of his daughter's deception. He would have been horrified to know that his financial mistakes were being used as the foundation for this ugly charade, that his memory was being tarnished to fuel his daughter's greed. They weren't protecting his dignity, as my mother claimed. They were desecrating it, and I was the only one who could stop them. My determination hardened into something unbreakable. This was no longer just about exposing a lie. It was about avenging my father's memory. I had the evidence. I had the truth. Now all I needed was the right stage for the final act. With the evidence secure, the question became not what to do, but how. My first instinct was a quiet, brutal confrontation. Just me, Chloe, and our mother, in the living room where it all began. I imagine laying the folder of evidence on the coffee table and watching their faces as the truth unspooled. But as I played the scene over in my head, I realized it wouldn't be enough. They were masters of denial and manipulation. They would find a way to twist it, to turn it back on me. They would accuse me of hiring someone to fabricate evidence, of being so jealous of Chloe's sacrifice that I had concocted this disgusting story to ruin her. They would retreat into their fortress of lies, and I would be left screaming at the walls. No, a private confrontation wouldn't provide justice. It would just lead to more drama, more lies. Justice, I realized, requires an audience. Their entire narrative was built on a public performance of grief and sacrifice. The takedown had to be equally public. The lie had to be shattered in front of the very people they had worked so hard to deceive. I started to formulate a plan. It was cold, calculated, and theatrical in its own right. I would use their own tactics against them. I called my mother. I put on my best impression of a chastened, dutiful son. Mom, I said, my voice heavy with fake remorse. You were right. I've been a fool. I've been looking at my own finances, and I see now how selfish I've been. I want to make things right. I could almost hear the triumphant smile in her voice. Oh, Leo, I knew you'd come around. Your father would be so proud. I want to do something for Chloe, I continued, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. And for Dad's memory, I want to host a memorial dinner. We can invite the whole family, Dad's closest friends. It will be a chance for me to publicly thank Chloe for everything she's done and to announce that I'm taking over the financial burden from now on. The hook was set. My mother was ecstatic. A public celebration of Chloe's sainthood funded by her contrite brother. It was everything she could have dreamed of. She immediately got on the phone, her voice buzzing with excitement as she began inviting the entire cast of characters from their little play. The judgmental aunts, the pitying uncles, the old family friends who had been fed the official story. The stage was being set, the audience was being gathered, and I, the director of this final act, was ready. I had the script. I had the props, a neatly organized binder, courtesy of Marcus, filled with bank statements, surveillance photos, and a printed copy of Chloe's golden Childone ledger. The performance was scheduled for 1 week's time. The week leading up to the memorial dinner was one of the longest of my life. I was a bundle of coiled nerves and icy resolve. I played my part to perfection. I spoke with my mother daily, discussing catering options and the guest list. I feigned enthusiasm, listening to her gush about how this dinner would finally bring the family together and heal the rift that I had supposedly caused. She was completely oblivious, blinded by her eagerness to see her narrative validated. I even had a phone call with Chloe. It was a masterpiece of controlled insincerity. She was gracious, accepting my apology with a tone of magnanimous forgiveness. It's okay, Leo, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I know this has been hard for you to process. I'm just glad we can finally move forward as a family. I had to grip the phone tightly to keep my hand from shaking with rage. The audacity of her condescension was almost unbelievable. She truly believed she had won, that she had successfully manipulated everyone, including me. She had no idea she was talking to her executioner. Marcus, my stoic ally, delivered the final package 2 days before the dinner. It was a slim, professional-looking binder. Inside, everything was laid out with the precision of a legal document. Section 1 contained the surveillance logs and photos. Section 2 had the analysis of her shell business and the proof of her minimal legitimate income. Section 3 contained the printouts from her secret cloud account, the ledger of her night job, with the most damning entries highlighted in yellow. He also included one final piece of evidence that made my blood run cold. He had discovered that Chloe had taken out a new line of credit in my father's name after he had passed away, using a digital signature. She was actively adding to the debt while pretending to pay it off. This wasn't just deception anymore. This was fraud. Are you sure you want to go through with this, Leo? Marcus asked, his professional demeanor softening for a moment. This will be a nuclear event for your family. There's no coming back from it. I looked at the binder, at the cold, hard proof of my sister's monstrous betrayal and my mother's willful ignorance. I thought of my father, whose legacy they had so thoroughly defiled. There's nothing to come back to. I said, my voice devoid of any doubt. They destroyed it already. I'm just cleaning up the rubble. The night of the dinner arrived. I had booked a private room at a respectable, old-fashioned restaurant, the kind of place my father used to like. It was a neutral ground, but one that added a touch of solemnity to the occasion, lulling them into a false sense of security. I arrived early, setting up a small easel at the front of the room, which I told the staff was for a memorial photo of my father. In reality, it was for the large poster boards I had prepared, displaying key pieces of evidence. The guests began to arrive, around 15 of them in total. My aunts, my uncles, a few of my father's old business partners. They all greeted me with a new warmth, a patronizing approval that made my skin crawl. They had heard the news of my repentance, and they were pleased. I was finally playing my part. Then my mother and Chloe made their entrance. My mother was beaming, her eyes sweeping across the room with pride. Chloe was the star of the show, dressed in an elegant black dress that I knew, from her secret ledger, had cost $2,000. She looked every bit the tragic heroine, her expression a perfect blend of modesty and sorrow. She accepted the fawning greetings from our relatives with a practiced grace, everyone telling her how wonderful she looked, how strong she was. She met my gaze across the room and gave me a small conspiratorial smile as if to say, "See, this is how it should be." The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. I endured the pre-dinner drinks, listening to the chorus of praise for Chloe. An absolute angel, my Aunt Carol said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. To put her own life on hold like that, it's an inspiration. My Uncle Mark clapped me on the shoulder. Good on you for finally stepping up, son. Your sister's a saint, and it's about time you recognized it. I just nodded, a tight smile plastered on my face, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of anticipation against my ribs. Let them sing her praises, I thought. Let them build her pedestal as high as they can. The fall will be that much greater. Dinner was served, and the small talk continued, all of it orbiting around the two central themes of the evening, my father's tragic passing and Chloe's heroic sacrifice. I let them talk. I let them build their narrative, reinforcing every lie with their shared willful blindness. Finally, as the dessert plates were being cleared, I stood up. I tapped my glass with a spoon and the room fell silent. All eyes were on me. This was it, the moment of truth. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the hurricane raging inside me. I wanted to bring us together to honor the memory of my father, a man we all loved. But I also wanted to clear the air about some family matters. I looked directly at my mother and Chloe, who were watching me with expectant smiles. As many of you now know, my father left behind some significant financial difficulties. And for years, my sister Chloe has been held up as the one who shouldered this burden alone. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I saw Chloe preen slightly, ready for the wave of adulation I was about to unleash. My mother has spoken at length about Chloe's sacrifices, about the night and day work she has done to keep the family afloat, and tonight I want to shed some light on that work. I want to finally give Chloe the credit she truly deserves. I turned and walked over to the easel. With a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness, I removed the cloth that was covering it. But instead of a smiling photo of my father, there was a large poster board. On it was a blown-up copy of Chloe's secret ledger, the columns family, debt, and personal clearly visible. The room was silent, a confused murmur rippling through the guests. I picked up the binder from the table next to the easel. I did some digging, I said, my voice now as hard as steel. Because the story didn't make sense, the math didn't add up. You see, I wondered how a freelance graphic designer could afford a lavish lifestyle while also paying off hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I looked at Chloe. Her smile had vanished, replaced by a pale mask of confusion and dawning horror. My mother's face was a mixture of shock and outrage. "Leo, what is this? What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice a sharp whisper. I ignored her. My attention was focused entirely on my sister. So I hired a professional to find out, and what he found was illuminating. It turns out, Chloe does have another job. A night job, you could call it. I flipped to the first page of the binder, my movements slow and deliberate. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the restaurant's ventilation system. "This is a surveillance log," I announced, my voice projecting to every corner of the room. "It details my sister's movements for the past month. It seems her late-night client meetings were not for graphic design. They were at five-star hotels, luxury penthouse apartments, and exclusive private residences." I turned the binder around so the guests could see the first photograph, a clear, undeniable shot of Chloe stepping into a black town car outside the Grand Carlton Hotel at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. A collective gasp went through the room. Chloe's face had gone from pale to ashen. She looked like she had been punched in the gut. "Leo, stop this," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "You're insane." My mother shot to her feet. "This is outrageous. He's lying." "Leo, How dare you disgrace your father's memory with these disgusting fantasies? You're just jealous of your sister. Her voice was shrill, desperate, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The guests were no longer looking at me with pity, but with a horrified, rapt attention. They were looking at Chloe, then back at the evidence. I continued, my voice unwavering. I'm not lying. I have the records from the car service she used. I have photographs from a dozen different nights at a half dozen different locations. But the best evidence came from Chloe herself. I flipped the poster board on the easel, revealing the second board. It was a blown-up screenshot of her spreadsheet, the one titled Golden Child Own. She kept a ledger, I explained calmly. A very detailed ledger of her clients, the gifts they gave her, and her personal notes about them. It also tracks how she spent the money. I pointed to a highlighted line item. For instance, on the same day she made a payment on my father's debt, she also spent $5,000 on a handbag. She called it a business expense. I suppose in a way it was. The room erupted in hushed, horrified whispers. My Aunt Carol's jaw was on the floor. My Uncle Mark looked like he was going to be sick. The carefully constructed image of St. Chloe was not just cracking, it was exploding. They had been duped, and the realization was dawning on their faces. Chloe finally found her voice, a high-pitched, desperate shriek. He's making it up! It's all fake! He hired someone to create this! He's always hated me! He's always been jealous! She turned to our mother, her eyes pleading. Mom, make him stop! Tell them he's lying! My mother, her face, a contorted mask of fury and humiliation, pointed a trembling finger at me. You are no son of mine! You would do this? At your own father's memorial? You would tell these vile, disgusting lies to hurt your sister, the one person who has done nothing but sacrifice for this family? Her defense was passionate, but it was hollow. The evidence was too specific, too detailed. The guests were looking at the spreadsheets, at the photographs, and they were seeing the truth. The narrative was collapsing in real time. I held up my hand for silence. Sacrifice? I said, my voice dripping with cold irony. Let's talk about sacrifice. I turned to the final, most damning piece of evidence. I hadn't put it on a poster board. This one was personal. I walked over to my mother and Chloe holding out a single piece of paper. This is a document from the bank. It's an application for a new line of credit for $50,000. It's in my father's name. My mother looked at it, confused. What is this? Look at the date the application was filed, I said softly. She scanned the paper and her breath hitched. Chloe stared at the document as if it were a snake. It's dated 2 weeks after Dad died, I stated, my voice ringing out in the silent room. She used a digital copy of his signature to apply for more debt in a dead man's name. She wasn't just paying off his debts, she was adding to them. She was committing fraud. That was the final blow. The word fraud hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. It was no longer a matter of salacious rumors or family jealousy. It was a crime. Chloe crumpled. All the fight went out of her. She sank into her chair, her face in her hands, and began to sob. Not the delicate, performative tears of a martyr, but the ugly, racking sobs of someone whose entire world had just been obliterated. My mother stared at the paper, then at her sobbing daughter, then at me. Her face was a ruin of disbelief and utter devastation. The golden child had fallen, and she had taken my mother's world down with her. The aftermath was chaos. The dinner party disintegrated immediately. My relatives, their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and disgust, fled the private room as if it were on fire. They couldn't get away from the stench of the truth fast enough. Some cast pitying glances at my mother. Others shot me, looks of stunned disbelief. None of them said a word to me. I was left alone in the room with my mother and my sister. Chloe was still sobbing, her shoulders shaking. My mother stood frozen, staring at the poster boards, at the irrefutable proof of the world of lies she had not only inhabited, but had actively helped to build. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, she turned to me, and the look in her eyes was not one of gratitude for the truth, but of pure, unadulterated hatred. You did this, she whispered, her voice venomous. You couldn't stand that she was the one he loved more. You couldn't stand that she was the one who saved this family, so you had to destroy her. You had to destroy everything. It was breathtaking. Even now, with the truth laid bare, she was incapable of blaming Chloe or herself. I was the villain. I had brought the shame upon them, not the daughter who had lived a lie and committed fraud, or the mother who had enabled it all. She saved nothing, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that had been churning in me for weeks. She was running a business, Mom. And this family, Dad's debt, was her marketing plan. You were her biggest cheerleader. I gestured to the empty tables, the half-eaten desserts. You were so desperate to believe in the golden child that you never stopped to ask a single question. You never wanted to know the truth. You just wanted the bills to be paid. I looked at Chloe, who had finally stopped crying and was now staring at her hands, her face blotchy and swollen. It's over, Chloe, I said. The performance is done. I picked up my binder of evidence, turned my back on the wreckage of my family, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. The cool night air felt like a release. I had done it. I had exposed the lie. But there was no triumph, no sweet taste of victory. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness where my family used to be. In the weeks that followed, I took control. My mother, consumed by shame and her misplaced loyalty to Chloe, was incapable of dealing with the fallout. She refused to speak to me, communicating only through terse, accusatory texts. Chloe had disappeared, staying with a friend, refusing to face the consequences of her actions. That was fine. It left me with a clear path to do what needed to be done. I took the binder of evidence to the family's lawyer, an old friend of my father's who had been at the disastrous dinner. He was horrified, but he understood the legal ramifications immediately. The fraudulent loan application was the key. It gave me the leverage I needed. Armed with a power of attorney that my mother, in her shattered state, signed without much of a fight, I began the process of untangling the financial mess. The first thing I did was get a clear picture of the actual debt. It was bad, but not nearly as catastrophic as Chloe had led my mother to believe. She had inflated the numbers, mixing in her own personal expenses to make her sacrifice seem even greater. She hadn't just been paying off debts. She had been paying for her entire lifestyle and calling it a family crisis. I sold some of my own stock portfolio, a decision that stung but was necessary, and paid off the entirety of my father's legitimate debts in one lump sum. I cleared his name. I reclaimed his honor from the filth that Chloe had smeared on it. Then I dealt with the house. The second mortgage was legitimate, a product of my father's bad decisions. But I paid it off, securing the deed. The house was now mine. My mother was allowed to live there, but she was living in my house, a guest dependent on the son she had vilified. The final step was dealing with Chloe. The lawyer made it clear that what she had done with the loan application was a felony. I had a choice. I could press charges and send her to jail, or I could use that threat as leverage. I chose the latter. I had no interest in seeing her behind bars. That felt like a different kind of poison. I wanted restitution. Through our lawyers, an agreement was reached. Chloe would sign a legally binding document acknowledging her actions and agreeing to a repayment plan. She would pay me back for every dollar of her personal spending that she had disguised as family debt, and she would pay back the fraudulent loan. It was a substantial sum, one that would force her to get a real job and live in the real world for the first time in her life. The golden child's free ride was officially over. The family as I had known it was gone. The news of what had happened at the dinner spread like wildfire through our extended network of relatives. The narrative had flipped completely. Chloe was no longer the saint. She was a pariah. The same aunts and uncles who had praised her sacrifice now spoke of her in hushed, scandalized tones. But their sympathy did not transfer to me. In their eyes, I was still the one who had brought the shame to light, the one who had aired the family's dirty laundry in public. They would have preferred the comfortable lie to the ugly truth. I was an outcast, a status I found I was perfectly comfortable with. My relationship with my mother is now one of cold, distant necessity. We speak only about household matters, logistics. The warmth is gone, replaced by a permanent layer of resentment and ice. She will never forgive me for shattering her illusion, for forcing her to see her daughter and herself for what they truly are. I see Chloe's life now only through the payments that arrive in my bank account each month. A stark, numerical reminder of her betrayal. I hear through the grapevine that she is working as a retail manager, that she has moved into a small, modest apartment. The designer clothes and lavish trips are a thing of the past. She is living the life of struggle she once pretended to have, and I feel nothing about it. No pity, no satisfaction, just a quiet finality. My victory was not in her downfall, but in my own liberation. I am free from their toxic orbit, free from the crushing weight of their expectations and their lies. I have mourned my father properly, not for the flawed man he was, but for the good man he tried to be. I honor him by living a life of integrity, the very thing they tried to strip away from his memory. I have found a strange peace in the silence, in the empty space where their drama used to be. Sometimes I sit in my apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window, and I think about the concept of family. Is it a bond of blood, or a pact of mutual respect and honesty? For most of my life, I believed it was the former, an unbreakable tie that I had to endure. But now I know that isn't true. True family, the kind worth having, is built on a foundation of truth. My family's foundation was built on lies, with my sister as the glittering, hollow centerpiece. The entire structure was rotten, and all it took was one hard push for it all to come crashing down. What I did was brutal. I know that. I exposed my sister's darkest secrets and humiliated my mother in front of everyone they knew. There are those who would call me cruel, vengeful. They would say that some truths are better left buried, that family loyalty should trump all else. But what loyalty is owed to those who use you, lie to you, and desecrate the memory of someone you love for their own selfish gain? They didn't want a son or a brother. They wanted an audience and a bank account. When I refused to play my assigned role, they tried to cast me as the villain, so I decided to own it. I became the catalyst for the truth, no matter how painful it was. I have no regrets. I sleep soundly at night, something I'm sure my mother and sister cannot say. I am no longer defined by their narrative, by the role of the lesser child. I am simply Leo, a man who chose the hard truth over the easy lie. And in that choice, I found a different kind of family, the quiet, steady companionship of my own integrity. It's a family of one, but it is honest, and it is whole. The story I've just told you is a deeply personal one, a chapter of my life that feels both like a lifetime ago and like it happened just yesterday. Sharing it isn't easy, but I feel it's necessary. Because I know I'm not the only one who has ever felt like an outsider in their own family, the only one who has been cast in a role they didn't choose. The dynamics of the golden child and the scapegoat are played out in so many homes in quieter, less dramatic ways than mine. It's a subtle poison that can warp your sense of self-worth and force you into a lifetime of seeking approval that will never truly be given. My story is an extreme example, but its core message is universal. You have the right to define your own narrative. You do not have to accept the version of reality that others try to force upon you, especially when that reality is built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. My father was a good man, but he was a flawed man. His weakness, his blindness to my sister's true nature created the environment where her deception could fester and grow. My mother's weakness, her refusal to face uncomfortable truths, made her a willing accomplice. They built a cage of lies around themselves, and they were angry at me for refusing to enter it with them. So I ask you, if you see yourself in any part of this story, to look at the narratives that govern your own life. Are they true? Are they fair? Do they honor who you are, or do they serve someone else's agenda? Standing up for the truth, especially within a family, is one of the hardest things a person can do. It can feel like an act of betrayal, but sometimes it is the ultimate act of self-love and preservation. It's an affirmation that you matter, that your perception is valid, and that you will not be a silent participant in a lie. Looking back, the anger has faded. The raw, burning rage that fueled my quest for justice has cooled into a scar, a permanent reminder of the battle I fought and won. What remains is a profound sense of clarity. For 32 years, I lived under a shadow, the shadow of the golden child. I measured my worth against an impossible, idealized standard and always came up short in their eyes. The great irony is that in destroying their lies, I finally found the validation I had subconsciously sought for so long. But it didn't come from them. It came from within. It came from trusting my own instincts, from standing up for my own principles, and from defending the memory of my father in a way that truly honored him. Marcus, the private investigator, was my ally, my savior in a practical sense. He gave me the tools I needed to fight back. But the real savior was the part of myself that refused to be gaslit. The part that knew the story didn't add up and was brave enough to pull at the thread until the entire tapestry unraveled. I learned that you can't force people to see the truth. My mother will likely go to her grave believing that I am the villain of this story, the cold-hearted son who destroyed her happiness out of jealousy. I have to live with that, but I am no longer responsible for her happiness or for her delusions. My only responsibility is to live my own life with the kind of honesty and integrity that they so carelessly abandoned. The path to healing is a long one, and it's a journey I am still on, but it is a path of my own choosing, illuminated by the harsh but cleansing light of the truth. My father's study, the room that was once a forbidden zone guarded by my mother, is now my own. After I took possession of the house, it was the first room I cleared out. It was filled with his old books, his model airplanes, and the faint lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. As I sorted through his belongings, I found a small locked box in the back of his closet. The key was hidden in a hollowed-out book on a shelf. Inside, there wasn't anything of monetary value. There were old photographs of me as a child, my report cards from elementary school, the first tie I ever gave him for Father's Day, and there was a letter addressed to me, but never sent. It was dated a year before his death. In it, he apologized. He wrote about the pressure he was under, the shame of his financial failures. He wrote, "I know I have not always been fair to you, Leo. I have let Chloe's light blind me at times, and I have not seen or appreciated the strong, capable man you have become. You are the son I am most proud of, the one I know I can always depend on. I am sorry if I have not shown it." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. It was the validation I never knew I needed, a message from beyond the grave that confirmed what I had always hoped. He saw me. He knew. It didn't excuse his actions, but it explained them. It gave me back a piece of my father that Chloe's narrative had tried to steal. This letter, this small, secret confession, was the true inheritance he left me. It was worth more than the house, more than any amount of money. It was the truth, and it was the final piece I needed to truly heal and move on. So what is the moral of this story? I suppose it's that the truth is a powerful, dangerous thing. It can shatter families and destroy illusions. But it's also the only thing that can truly set you free. For years, I was trapped in a family dynamic that was slowly poisoning me. By choosing to seek out and reveal the truth, I performed a painful but necessary surgery. I cut out the cancer of their lies, and in doing so, I saved myself. I would encourage anyone in a similar situation to trust their gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If a story sounds too good to be true, it's likely a fiction. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions, and don't be afraid of the answers. The cost of living a lie is far greater than the pain of facing the truth. My life is quieter now, but it is authentic. It is mine. And I will spend the rest of it honoring my father's true legacy, the one he revealed in his final, secret letter. The legacy of a man who, despite his flaws, ultimately knew the value of his dependable, honest son. The golden child's shine was an illusion, but the foundation I stand on now is real, and it is unbreakable. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope that by sharing it, I might give someone else the courage to start their own quest for the truth, no matter where it leads. The final loose end was the house. For months after the revelation, my mother lived there in a state of self-imposed exile, a ghost haunting the halls of her former life. Our interactions were minimal and strained. The house itself felt like a monument to our shared trauma. I knew that for either of us to truly move on, a change had to be made. I wasn't going to evict my own mother, but I couldn't continue to be her landlord, tethered to the very place where the lies had been spun. I sat down with her one last time. In the sterile environment of a lawyer's office, I made her an offer. I would sell the house, and from the proceeds, I would give her enough money to buy a small condominium in a retirement community a few towns over. It was a clean break, a way for her to start over, away from the prying eyes and whispered gossip of the town that now knew her family's shame. The rest of the money I would put into a trust for my own future, she agreed, her voice flat and defeated. There was no fight left in her. Selling my childhood home was harder than I expected. It felt like burying the last piece of my past, the good and the bad. As I walked through the empty rooms for the final time, I wasn't filled with anger or sadness, but with a sense of peace. It was just a building, a collection of wooden nails. The memories, the love, the pain, I would carry those with me regardless. The house was no longer a home. It had become a crime scene, and it was time to let it go. This final act of untangling was for me. It was about severing the last physical tie to the drama, freeing myself not just emotionally, but financially and geographically as well. My life now is built on simple, solid things. My work, which continues to challenge and reward me. My friendships, with people who know my story and value me for who I am. I am starting to date again, cautiously, but with an open heart. I am building a new family, one chosen, not inherited. One built on the principles of honesty and mutual respect that my old family lacked. The money from Chloe's repayment plan continues to arrive each month. A small, recurring reminder of the past, but it no longer holds any emotional charge. It's just a closing of a ledger that I have long since moved on from. Occasionally, I think about what it must be like for them. For my mother in her new, smaller life, surrounded by strangers with nothing but her bitterness for company. For Chloe, working a job she likely despises, her dreams of effortless glamour turn to ash. I don't feel pleasure in their downfall. Instead, I feel a strange, detached pity. They had a chance at a real family, a real connection, but they traded it all for a fantasy. They chose the glittering lie over the messy, imperfect truth. And now, they are living with the consequences of that choice, just as I am living with the rewards of mine. The scales have been balanced. Justice, in its own complicated way, has been served. My quest is over. The vindication is complete. And what lies ahead is a future that I, and I alone, will write. The golden child is a ghost of the past, and I am finally completely free.